Nick with Push Industries. Today we have our model year 2023 John Deere 1025R, and we are going to install our Push Industries turbo kit onto it. Now this is a complete system, fully reversible, requires no modifications to the tractor, and this kit is going to have all the components needed. Before diving into it, here's a quick overview of the included components. Our goal with this kit was to give you more power for your machine, as well as make it 100% reversible, requiring no modifications, and providing the system as assembled as possible so that when you go to install, it is extremely quick. Our turbo assembly is going to come mounted to the exhaust riser, and the hot and cold side are all bolted on, ready to go. All of your connections are there to just hook up your hoses. Goes on super quick, and you're also going to get two different muffler options. One is just essentially a bypass going straight through, and if you have concerns for any emissions, we do have one that has a filter in it, and if it gets plugged out, you can just simply rinse it out. Okay, getting started, we've got our side panels removed, and we actually removed our hood, more so for light option. You do not need to do this for your install. However, if you do want to on the tractor that we have here, we just popped off the gas shocks and then just undid these four nuts on either side and lifted the hood off. First thing we're going to remove is the stock exhaust system. We're going to use 13mm wrenches and ratchets, taking off these two bolts and then removing the nuts on the stock exhaust. This bracket is going to be removed and set aside, and we are also going to remove this bolt here, and that whole exhaust assembly will slide right off. Both of these parts removed, we're going to now put a paper rag inside that exhaust hole, and we're going to leave that gasket on as that is reused when we install the turbo. Our next step is removing the stock air intake tubes. We've got two hose clamps, one here and one here. We're going to remove them using a 5/16 socket. And this does fit kind of tight, so it is a good idea to get it nice and loose. Then we're going to wiggle that off. Nice snug fit. And remember to plug this with some paper just so we don't stick anything in the engine that shouldn't be there. And this part on this tractor does move, so if it does make an evil noise when you're going through and removing that, not to be alarmed. We'll adjust that later when we go to reinstall everything. Perfectly normal. Next, we're going to remove these four Phillips screws that hold on the crankcase diaphragm. It is important to really take your time, make sure that you have the right sized bit, because these can take a little elbow grease to get out and you don't want to strip the heads. This tractor's been apart before, so it's going to come apart maybe a little easier than yours. Bolts are out. Now we'll pop that off, making sure to grab the rubber diaphragm as well. And we're going to stick a rag in there. Coming around to the other side of the tractor, we're going to remove this metal shroud. We've got 2 bolts, 15 millimeter down there, and then a 13 millimeter up top. We're going to pop those off. Next, we're going to grab our replacement cap and elbow, and we are going to thread the elbow into the cap like so. There's a jam nut so you can orientate it however you would like and lock it into place. That's good for now. We'll go remove our cap. With our new cap assembled, we're going to pop the oil cap off. And install the new one on. Might have to slide that hose out of the way. And that's nice and tight. Perfect. Now we can just orientate that elbow how we want it, and then we have this jam nut down here that can lock it into place. So we're going to leave it loose for now, and then once we make our final connection, we'll tighten that jam nut. Next step is to locate the oil pressure sensor, and we are going to disconnect the wire and then remove the plug with a 24 millimeter deep well socket and extension. And the reason why is we're going to install this end of this fitting, and that's what's going to feed our turbo the oil. We are going to connect that pressure sensor that you see in the side of the block to here, and then the hose that's going to feed to the turbo is going to go to here. Good idea to use some type of oil or gas resistant thread sealant tape on both. Be careful not to get any goop where the sensor goes. And we're going to pop that off. Comes out nice and easy, just take your time. So we're going to install our new oil pressure fitting in the side of the block. Like I said, should have some sort of thread tape or sealant on there. We're going to be pulling this thing apart, so we're omitting. And you're going to want to get it nice and snug, and then using a 21 millimeter socket. You don't want to go too crazy, but you do want to wind up with that hole for the pressure sensor facing up. So you kind of got to use your best judgment as when to stop and not go too far. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to snug. We're just going to give it a little bit more so it's nice and vertical. Just a little bit more. Let's get that oil sensor reinstalled. We'll want to typically add some sort of thread sealant onto there. Make sure you don't get any in the sensor. Get it started by hand. It is 24 millimeter. It's going to be tough to get a socket in there. You can get a 24 millimeter wrench. However, you got to be a little careful because they're usually pretty long. We have found that the easiest way is just to use like a crescent wrench that has a shorter handle. Gives you more dexterity. And once you get it snugged up, we're going to put that sensor wire back on the top. Okay, sensor's on. Going to connect the wire. All right, so this fitting is now ready for us to connect our oil line that's going to feed the turbo. We're going to park this right here and go to... So now we're going to replace the crankcase diaphragm cover with the R push industry part. You're going to need this square plate, O-ring, and 4 button head screws. Prior to installing the plate, we need to properly seat the O-ring into the groove. If you have trouble with the O-ring staying in place, you can use a little bit of grease to act as an adhesive. Okay, we're going to install our plate. We need to remove our rag. And then we're going to use 4 button head screws. They are a 3 millimeter Allen size. Okay, and we got our plate on. Now we can go and put our turbo assembly onto the exhaust manifold. Okay, here's our pre-built turbo assembly. Let's go put it on the tractor. And we're going to remove our rag. We've already inspected our gasket to make sure it's still good. And we set that stack on top of the exhaust manifold. We are going to omit the metal guard. You can cut it into place if you wanted to, make it fit. However, we don't feel it's necessary. And you can just reuse your flange nuts from the stock muffler. So once all 4 nuts are on, we're actually going to leave them kind of loose so we can fit up all the other exhaust components before we reef it all down to make sure everything aligns properly. First step in getting the exhaust installed, we are going to put the U-pipe on, and we are going to grab one of the V-band clamps and head over to the tractor. So we're going to take a V-band clamp and the U-pipe, put it on the hot side of the turbo, and that is what our muffler is going to bolt to next. Pinches on, they're pretty forgiving. You don't need to over tighten these. And we're just going to get it kind of snug so it'll somewhat hold its place, but we can still manipulate it again and do all the final tightening at the very end. Okay, we're going to grab our muffler and our large V-band clamp and head on over. And we're going to put that V-band clamp onto the U-pipe and get that muffler installed. Same thing, we're going to keep it on the loose side of snug so we can manipulate it. One thing to touch on is that we do run out of clearance a little bit here with those bolts, so you can see that we carefully positioned the V-band clamp up here to avoid them, and then you have no issues with any clearance. So with the muffler on, we can see that everything's starting to take shape here, and we can kind of start checking our alignment. And if you remember, we left these 4 riser nuts loose, and we can wiggle this whole assembly. And so if we wiggle it, we can see if we're off. So if we pull it all the way towards us, we're not aligned. It looks like this thing's going to want to be pushed forward, and that would be our perfect alignment spot right there. So now, because everything's loose, we're just going to lift up this muffler and expose those riser bolts and give them a nice final tighten. All right, we got the 4 riser studs tightened. Double checking our alignment, it all looks good. And then we are going to put the turn down pipe on next. Here's our turn down pipe and our remaining V-band clamp, and we'll head over to the tractor. Okay, we got the V-band in place on the muffler, and we're going to put the turn down pipe on, clamp it all together. and we are going to reinstall the bolt that held the original downpipe on, and we forgot to grab it from our parts, but you are going to add a washer to that bolt. So now that we've got everything roughed into place with the exhaust, we're going to go and check where our final bolts are going to go. We still have some wiggle room here. Everything will bolt up nicely. However, we just want to check and make sure our clearance from our muffler to our exhaust riser is good. So to check that, we're going to go around to the back side. Okay, we're on the back side here. Doesn't look like our muffler's hitting anything. So we will be good to put those bolts in and then snug everything up. We're going to put our final 2 muffler bolts on, reusing our bolts and nuts, and you're going to add the included washers. And we are going to get these just nice and snug. Before we give these the final tighten, we're going to go through and tighten up all of our V-band clamps first, starting at the top, working our way down. So before giving our final tighten, making sure our clamp is in the right spot. As you can see, it's clearing the bolt head right there, so we can tighten that down. So we got the top V-band clamp tightened. We did actually have to reposition it. You can see the clamp is pointed downward now. When we got it fully tight, we were interfering with this bolt head here. So we just loosened everything and repositioned the 2 ends of the clamp so that they would be in between the hex heads on the hot side of the turbo. Working our way down to tighten the muffler V-band clamp. We're going to actually position this one back a little bit. It's kind of sticking out. We don't like that. And we're going to get it there so it's out of the way, and we will snug that one down. All right, we're going to do the muffler to the downpipe. Got that tucked out of the way, and we'll get that snugged up. Now we're going to do the 2 muffler bolts, snug them up. And we're going to go down to the bolt by the turn down. Okay, and we're just going to go through, double check our clearances on the back side, make sure nothing shifted. Yep, plenty of room. Nothing's going to hit. Now we're going to begin to connect our oil hoses. The first one we will do will be the oil return that goes from the turbo back down to the crankcase. To do that, we're going to grab our largest diameter hose. We'll start by connecting it to the turbo. Hand tight. And then run it back down to the crankcase. And we will be able to adjust this neck, because remember, there's a jam nut that can hold that into place. So we want to make sure when we do our final tightening, it's not rubbing on anything. This is a rather large diameter hex, so we are using a crescent wrench. Kind of got to get in there at an angle and make sure it's nice and snug. Now on the bottom half of the return, we're going to adjust the hose so it's out of the way and tighten the jam nut. And then go and tighten the hose down. Next, we're going to install the charge tube. The kit includes a charge tube for both the 1025 and the 1023. They share a same block. The intake for the 1023 is down here. You can see the casting is not machined. So the first silicone tube we're going to show you will go from here to the charge tube if you have a 1023. And if you're doing this on a 1025R, you'll use the other charge tube, which would go from here to here. So this would be the charge tube for the 1023, and this is the charge tube for the 1025. So here would be the 1023 on that lower port going up to the turbo. And here's the 1025. So we're going to put our charge tube on the 1025R. We're going to grab our appropriate tube and our 2 hose clamps. Here's the charge tube going on. And here it's going on the turbo. And we'll position our clamps and tighten them down. We're going to tighten up these hose clamps. Next, we're going to put the intake side of the silicone on. It's going to connect from here to where that red cap is. There's our intake silicone and our remaining 2 hose clamps. We're going to remove our plug and install the silicone. When you're installing the intake silicone, try and get it so this aluminum bung is pointed somewhat down, and then go through and tighten up your hose clamps. We are going to install the oil supply to the turbo. We're going to go from here down to here. To do that, we're going to need our longest oil line, 2 crush washers, and a banjo bolt. Okay, so we're going to put the crush washer onto the turbo. Careful not to drop it, and then a crush washer on the top of the banjo bolt. We'll get it snug and then run it down to the oil supply. So we've got our hose routed how we want it, and we are going to connect it to the supply. Banjo fitting up top is a 12. Tighten it down. And the fitting down below is a 14. With these hoses, it's important to note that they can all be shortened in length relatively easily. They come apart by simply loosening these 2 nuts closest to the hose, spinning them in opposite directions from one another, and the hose will release. Once you get the hose to release, get yourself a heavy-duty cable cutter. There is some metal in these hoses, so you do need something that's pretty robust and sharp to cut through it. So here we are taking apart the hose. 1 wrench is on, putting on the other wrench. Gonna spin them apart, and those fittings that we're taking apart are fine threads, so it does take quite a bit. Use the wrench as long as necessary, and then you can just loosen it by hand. So our hose is exposed. This is what presses into the rubber, acting as a flare, keeping it all sealed. That goes over on the outside. And so you can just snip that off. Okay, here we are cutting it. So you can see there is some metal in there. And that cable cutters is brand new. If you are going to cut them, I would recommend getting a brand new cable cutters. Here's the hose going back together. I'm going to put that sleeve on first. The flare fitting. Make sure that sleeve is pressed all the way tight on the edge of the hose that you just cut. And that flare fitting will kind of just force its way in there, make everything align and create a good seal. And the final hose, we're going to connect the intake to the block-off plate. Snugged up, and we'll tighten them down. And tighten them down. So that'll conclude the bulk of the installation of our turbo kit. Good idea to go through and just double check, make sure everything's tight. You're going to want to fire it up, check for any oil leaks. Also a good idea too to check the level of your engine oil after you get it fired up. And it's good to go and just kind of heat cycle everything a couple of times. Bring it up to operating temperature, let it cool all the way back down to room temperature. Check for any loose bolts. You can potentially see some of your exhaust bolts may get a little loose. However, once it does heat cycle a handful of times, it might be very difficult to get them off. So just keep an eye on all of that, and you'll be good to go. One thing to touch on is the fuel adjustment screw, which is housed underneath this little aluminum tube. Because you are giving the engine more air, to get full max power out of the turbo, you would need to increase the fuel mixture, make the engine run richer. You can run the system as it is, and you'll see massive power gains. So I'd encourage you, before you go through and do this next step, to just go out and try it, try mowing, try blowing snow, do any activities that are going to really work the motor hard, and just get a flavor for how much more power you have. You may not even want to mess with this. However, if you are in higher elevations, it's probably going to be somewhat mandatory, just because you're already going to be at a horsepower loss. To remove that aluminum tube, we're going to use this die grinder. This one's by Milwaukee. The burr we've selected has kind of a sharp edge, so we can use it almost like a cutting tool, getting in really close and working our way across. We're just going to kind of cut in a nice clean line so we can separate that aluminum band with a flat blade screwdriver, and then access the mixture screw. Keep in mind that if you do go through the aluminum and hit what's underneath, there is another secondary cap, so you won't wreck the screw. It's basically like an acorn nut protecting the mixture screw. So you can kind of see in here, we're starting to get through Where some of that black is, we're hitting that cap, so we're getting close. We're just going to keep taking our time. Okay, so we've got our acorn cap off. We're going to see if we can spread it with the screwdriver. So you can see we're starting to spread that. And we just need to do a little bit more cutting there. There we go. All right, so here is the cover we removed. You can kind of see it's grooved on the inside, so you do have to cut it pretty much all the way to get it off. So just take your time. It's not overly hard. It probably took less than 5 minutes to do this. Just cut and test and see if you can open it up. With the aluminum shroud removed, we are going to remove this acorn nut to expose the fuel screw. 17 mil wrench. And we're just going to slide washer, lock washer, and then another copper washer off. With the fuel adjustment screw fully exposed, we are going to have a jam nut here, 17 mil, and then another flat spot here that's going to be a 10 mil. We are going to hold that stationary with the 10 mil and then loosen that jam nut. Jam nut's nice and loose. Then we're just going to come in with a paint marker and just put a nick here so we know where we started. And then we are going to back this out 3 turns. 1, 2, 3. So with the fuel screw being out 3 turns, what I like to do, just so you remember, should you ever want to go back to stock settings or just as a reference point, I am going to put a number 3. Right there. And so now I know I'll need to go 3 turns in to be back to stock. And we can put our jam nut back in. $10 mil and 17. Lock the jam nut in place. Copper washer. Locking tab washer. And final washer. Acorn nut, 17 mil. Snug it up. That's going to conclude the install for today. Very important, we did a bunch of work here. Start the tractor, check for any leaks. Make sure as it's running there's no obvious oil leaks. Once you shut it back down, open the hood. Make sure there's no driblets or any oil in that regard. Nothing rattled loose. Once you feel good about that, you're okay to get out there and go heat cycle it. Once it cools down, double check your bolts for tightness and just kind of be vigilant the first half a dozen times and make sure nothing worked itself loose. And once you get through, 4, 5, 6 full heat cycles and everything remains tight, you should be good to go. Thank you for watching this video. You can check us out at pushinds.com. That is pushinds.com. And we look forward to hearing from you.